Assalamualaikum dan hello pada semua para audience. Selamat datang pada sesi live webinar bersama Dr Judy Morgan atas topik Real Food for Cats. Untuk pengetahuan audience, Dr Judy Morgan adalah seorang doktor veteriner berpengalaman selama 36 tahun. Beliau juga adalah seorang veterinary acupuncturist, chiropractitioner dan food therapist yang bertarikh. Dr. Morgan juga merupakan penulis buku tersohor yang telah menulis 7 buah buku dan juga mempunyai rancangan radionya tersendiri iaitu Naturally Healthy Pets Radio. Visi Dr. Morgan adalah untuk membawa perubahan positif untuk haiwan peliharaan dengan mendidik dan memperkasakan pemilik-pemilik haiwan melalui penggunaan terapi penyembuhan semula jadi, meminimalkan penggunaan bahan kimia, vaksinasi dan makanan berproses yang tidak berkualiti. Dan sesi webinar ini ditaja oleh QV Meatbooster. Terima kasih QV Meatbooster, iaitu produk yang membantu paw parents yang busy mencari pembekal daging yang bersih, selamat dan dipotong mengikut saiz bersesuaian dengan kegemaran kucing. Yay! Thank you QV Meatbooster. So, tanpa berlengah lagi, mari kita alukan Dr. Judy Morgan dan memulakan sesi live webinar ini. Hi.
Good morning.
Hi, Doctor. Good morning to you. How are you?
I'm fine.
Hi, I'm Hafiza. I'm the one who's been communicating with Krista.
Okay.
And we're so happy to have you, so honored to have you with us today to give this seminar on the real cat food. And as our name suggests, our group consists of passionate cat owners who want to feed their cats proper, appropriate food to keep them at their best health. So far today, as we know, we have 70 registered participants. Although
awesome.
We have having slight technical issue at the moment, so we are trying to rectify it as we go along.
Okay.
As we know, we have about 10 vets that has joined this program, and then we are all eagerly waiting to tap into the vast knowledge of yours on the real food. So, if you don't mind, without further ado, if we can pass the screen on to you, Dr. Judy, so that we can start on the presentation.
Okay.
That's good. That'll be good.
Yeah. So you've got your technical issues fixed. We're ready to roll?
Are we ready to roll, technical people? Are we ready to roll?
Speaker.
Yep. Okay. Done? Can we go now? Okay. We're ready, apparently.
Okay. Well, I've never done a presentation through StreamYard, so hopefully it's going to let me share my presentation without any trouble.
Oh, okay. Yes,
I'll give it a try
as well, but I think it'll be fine.
Okay. So, for those who don't know me, I'm Dr. Judy Morgan. I am I'll say integrated veterinarian in the United States. I practiced small animal and equine horse medicine for 38 years before I sold my practices in November of 2020. And I've written 7 books. I am just a huge advocate for good health for our pets, and good health really starts with good nutrition, and so that's why I was asked to speak about cat nutrition today. So let's see if I can get my screen to share, and we're gonna pretend that this is all gonna work really well. Oh, that's not what I want. Give me a second. All right, come on, go away. Nope. Shoot. Go away. I will find how to get my slides started in 1 second. Oh, there we go. No, not gonna. Come on. There we go. See, you're not the only one with technical challenges in the morning.
Okay.
Oops.
Okay. A little bit better.
All right, so we are going to talk about improving health and longevity with species-appropriate diets, because this is so critical for our cats. And right now, I think I have 10 cats. The number keeps changing. We have 2 cats one who's totally indoors, one who's 95% indoor, and every once in a while decides she wants to take a stroll around the yard. And then our other cats were born here on our farm, and we have 23 acres. I don't know if you do acres over there, but it's a pretty large piece of land, and we have a bunch of farm animals, a bunch of dogs, and these two stray mama cats showed up, both pregnant at the same time, and both had their litters within a couple of weeks of each other. So suddenly we went from having a couple of cats to having a clouder of cats. And the great thing about the farm cats, we brought them in to deliver their kittens and then kept them inside until the kittens were about 10 to 12 weeks old, and then started slowly introducing them to our barn, which is a very safe environment. And all of these cats were raised on raw food. So they went straight from, we got the mamas on raw food. I don't know what they were eating before that. They were stray cats, so most likely they were eating wild prey that they were catching, although I think some neighbors were putting out what I call kitty crack, which is the really horrible corn-based dry food. That's what most people feed in this area. So the mama cats were really excited when 2 really nice raw meals were being served warm to them twice a day, and the kittens took to it really well and immediately started eating that. And the cats, they're now about 1.5 years old, the kittens, and I have to say these are probably the healthiest cats I have ever had. Even though my indoor cats were started on raw food right from the beginning as well. They were bottle babies that I delivered them at my clinic. And the mamas were shelter cats who had to go back to the shelter. They wouldn't take the kittens, so we bottle fed them. And so they immediately were weaned from their bottles onto raw food because they ate right next to our dogs. They kind of considered themselves as just part of the dog crowd, and started eating the raw dog food, and then we switched them over to raw cat food. However, those indoor cats are not as healthy as these outdoor cats. And part of the reason for that is that the indoor cats, we have studies that show that 90% of indoor cats have a very high stress level. And the reason they have that high stress level is that they don't get to do normal cat things. They are not out hunting and stalking and pouncing and catching, killing, and eating that prey. And they also don't have, well, they do in our house because we made it for them, but most indoor cats do not have that ability to have vertical space. It's really critical that we allow and provide for our indoor cats that vertical space where they can climb. So we have things attached to, we have bridges and shelves attached to our walls and scratching posts that are up literally over my head. They're about 9 feet high, so the cats can climb and jump from one thing to the next. They have plenty of opportunity to scratch, and that is what it takes to keep our indoor cats from being as stressed. Unfortunately, I do have one dog who really thinks it's fun to chase the kitties, so that does increase their stress level. The outdoor cats don't care. They just go sit on a fence and ignore the dog. So food is the foundation of life, and that's where we have to start with everything if we really want good health for our kitties. So this picture is one that I took many years ago. This is probably a 15-year-old picture. And this was food that I actually had in my house at the time. So on the right, we have what I call kitty crack, which is dry kibble. And at the time, I thought that I was doing a good job by feeding them, the most expensive, high quality kibble. Well, I've learned a lot about how kibble is made. I actually went and took a week-long course on formulating and making kibble and canned food from scratch, designing the diet using the software, and then making the diets. And one of the things that I learned is that when we have an extruded kibble product, it cannot have more than about 28 to 30% meat in there. Now, our cats are obligate carnivores, so if we are serving them a diet that can't have more than, it's less than 1/3 of the diet is actually meat, that's not a carnivorous diet. And the reason this dry kibble has to have all that carbohydrate in it is because when it goes through the machine called the extruder, which is done at very high heat, it won't stick together as a kibble if it has more meat than about 28 to 30%. So a lot of our kibbles are a lot less meat than that. They may only be 15 to 20% meat in that product. So in order to get it to stick as a kibble, it's got to have a glue to hold it together, and that is the starches and the carbohydrates. So in the middle, that is, that might be a freeze-dried food. I can't even remember at this point. I think that's a freeze-dried that's been rehydrated. It doesn't look like a raw food. So that's a freeze-dried that's been rehydrated, which is much better than the kibble because that's a freeze-dried raw. It has a lot of moisture when we put it back in, but all that moisture had been taken out. And that's another problem that we have with dry foods is the moisture content. We'll talk a little more about that. But that is a freeze-dried food. So the good thing about it is it's very high meat content. So freeze-dried raw cat foods are probably about 93 to 96% meat, bone, and organ. And then there's a small percentage of vegetable matter, which is usually for the fiber content and sometimes to get some of the B vitamins and things that we aren't necessarily getting as easily in our meat products. And then the other food over on the left, that is a canned product. I think that one is probably Tiki Cat, which comes out of Thailand, I believe. So they use a lot of chicken and a lot of fish in their food. It is made in a human kitchen, human food manufacturing standard, so you know, better than some others. But at this point, my cats don't even eat canned food because I've learned a lot over the years, and when we know better, we do better. So what I would add to this now would be the diets that my cats are eating now, which are fresh raw foods. I either make my own, I have a big grinder, or I buy commercial frozen raw foods for cats, which are going to be very, very high meat content, a little tiny bit of veggie for the fiber. Other ways to get the fiber, you could use a whole animal, like a prey model, where you would have the fur of the rabbit or the fur of the mouse or guinea pig, whatever you're feeding. And when we add the fur, we get a lot of those minerals and we get the fiber that we would get from vegetable matter. So I can't say this enough. Food is everything. I tell people all the time, they contact me, my cat has arthritis, my cat has allergies, my cat has stomatitis, my cat has whatever problem, and they want to know what supplements they can give to fix the problem. And my first question is always, what are you feeding? Because you cannot out-supplement a bad diet. If we have, it's building a house. If we have a weak foundation, I don't care how many bricks you put on top of that or how much you shore up the walls, if the foundation is not strong, the first storm that comes along, which, you know, an inflammatory problem, the house washes away and there's nothing left. So we always start with food. We always look at what are you feeding? How is that contributing to the problems that you're seeing in your pet? Okay, so things, oh, can I move my little box out of the way? Maybe a little bit, there we go. All right, so we have pet food regulations. I don't know anything about how things are regulated in Malaysia, but for FEDIAF is the European group that regulates food, and AFCO is the US group that regulates food. I know that in Canada there is no regulatory group, and I don't know what you guys have over there, but it's really interesting. Some countries are just like, you know, it's the wild, wild west for pet food, and you can kind of get away with whatever you want to do. But in Europe and AFCO, there are very strong regulations about labeling requirements and minimum nutrient requirements. But these groups that set the rules, they actually don't enforce the rules. So they are not enforcing bodies. That is left up to the individual states. I don't know what it is in Europe, whether it's a individual country thing or if it breaks down past that. But the reason I have this in here is when we look at these regulatory bodies that are setting the nutrient requirements, the people that are setting those regulations are representatives of the very large pet food companies. So Hills, Mars, Nestle Purina, Well Pet. I don't, and I know that those companies sell all over the world. So I'm sure you have some of those veterinary prescription diets and things over there.
Yes, we do. We do have lots of it here.
Lots of it. Okay. I know when I have traveled to other countries, and especially when I go to the Caribbean or Central America, and we go in pet stores or veterinary offices in those areas, all we see are the very, very low quality. Pedigree is the #1 selling dry pet food, which is just horrible because it is probably one of the worst foods out there. So this is the fox watching the hen house. So the people that are in charge of saying what is good in pet food are people who really only care about, one, using the waste products from the human food industry to feed animals and keeping stuff out of landfills. Okay, that's noble. Sounds noble. It's not. They're looking to make money off of the stuff that they normally would throw away. And two, they're looking for how inexpensively can we make a product so that we have a big profit margin and we look like we're great because we're satisfying the guidelines of FEDIAF and AFCO. So, when you see something and it says on the label, meets or exceeds AFCO guidelines or FEDIAF guidelines, woohoo, because the guidelines really stink. So NRC, the National Research Council, they were the ones that did the initial testing to decide what the guidelines should be for minimum and maximum nutrient levels in pet food. However, NRC guidelines were last updated in 2006, and when they did their studies on this, they used purified ingredients. So that means they weren't using the ingredients that are going into pet food. They weren't using corn gluten. They weren't using wheat middlings. They weren't using confinement raised beef or the waste products, the condemned meats of the human food industry. That is not what they used when they made these guidelines. They used purified products, which have a totally different nutrient level than what we are putting into what they are putting into pet food. I put different things in my pet food. So when we look at these guidelines, we have to look at it as, man, this is the bare minimum, and it's a starting point. So what happens is FEDIAF and AFCO, when they set their nutrient levels, they actually make them higher than what NRC stated in their research, because they know that what they're using to make the food is not the same thing as those purified ingredients. It's really awful, and we're going to look at some of the awful things that have been allowed in pet food and that are causing so much trouble for our pets. So again, they're looking at minimum requirements, not optimal. We'll see some studies that show that what we are supplying is not what our animals want. We also have to look at individual variation in pets and in food ingredients. So a kitten is going to, healthy, like my barn cats, who are so incredibly healthy, they're out there hunting all the time, plus they're getting fed really good meals, they're getting exercise, they're climbing, they're pouncing, they're wrestling, they're just having a really good time out there. That is vastly different from my indoor cat who never goes outside, never hunts, never pounces, never exercises. He sleeps 90% of the time, and he's not that old. So how they are each going to absorb and utilize the nutrients in their food is going to be incredibly variable. So one of the things that I'm a huge fan of is testing vitamin D levels in our pets. So this is an example of dogs, but the same thing could occur in cats. I had a client feeding nutritionally complete diets, one that she was making from a recipe and one that, and it was a recipe I designed, so I know on paper it's complete. And then also a commercial complete diet. She tested vitamin D levels. Her two dogs, one was 2 years old, the other was 12 years old. Optimum vitamin D levels were around 100 to 125 on this particular test. The young dog came in at 83. The old dog came in the low 40s. Now that's a huge difference, and she kind of blew up and said, I'm feeding nutritionally complete diets. Why are their vitamin D levels low? Well, that's the individual variation in the animal. My 15-and-a-half-year-old dog with cancer, eating nutritionally complete diets and on a vitamin D supplement, came in with a level of 23 because his gut is not working well. He's got cancer. He's got other things that he's dealing with. So his supplementation had to go up a lot, so that we have individual variation in pets in how they're absorbing, utilizing, and processing the food that we are giving them. And then we have that variation in food ingredients. So a wild-caught salmon ingredient is going to have a different nutrient ingredient panel than a farm-raised salmon. A grass-fed cow is going to have a different nutrient breakdown than confinement-raised beef. So we have, and then the other, even with vegetable matter, we look at how deficient was the soil that the plants were grown on, and that is going to affect the nutrient level in that individual ingredient. So how can we be so full of ourselves that we can say, when we're putting something in a formulator to make a diet, how can we say across the board, all beef has this nutrient level, all rice has this nutrient level? We can't. It's statistically impossible. We just can't do it. Even if we harvest our rice from the same field year after year, it's going to vary based on the rainfall, what was in the rainfall, what contaminants were there, how hot was it that year, how humid was it that year. Everything is variable. So we really cannot, across the board, be so egotistical to say, no, I made that, it's perfect. So the other problem we have is that AAFCO and FEDIAF, they regulate our companion animals, our dogs and our cats, the same that they regulate livestock. So the regulations, when we look at them and when we're looking at feed ingredients, they are looking at it as feed, like cattle feed, chicken feed, horse feed, and they call this dog feed and cat feed. It is not food, it is feed, and there's a huge difference in how that is regulated. In the United States, food is regulated by the USDA, the Department of Agriculture, because they regulate what goes into the human food chain. So the pet food industry has laws that say only clean, unadulterated meat can be used in pet food, yet they know that animals that were euthanized, animals that died of cancers, animals that died out in the field are allowed to be used in pet food. Legally, they are not, but when we have challenged FDA, they say, we don't see anything. They turn a blind eye, and they actually have stated that out loud, that we are not going to enforce that. It's just fine. So it's kind of scary. The other thing that we have with kibble is that is shelf stable for years. It has a ton of preservatives in it. And we had a little conversation with one of the big pet food manufacturers, and they very proudly stated, our kibble will still be just as fresh 25 years from now in that bag. In an unopened bag, it would still be just as fresh in 25 years. I'm sorry, I don't want so many preservatives in my food that it's still good in 25 years. I mean, maybe if the world blows up and I've got to have stuff stored in some stockpile somewhere, maybe. But no, I don't want something that has so many preservatives that it's still
maybe when there is a zombie apocalypse, yeah?
Exactly. If we hit the zombie apocalypse, then I'm going to want this. Otherwise, no. And so for those of you who, and I know there's some veterinarians on here, if you have clients, this goes for dogs or cats, who insist on feeding kibble for whatever reason, economics, they, have this belief that that's what's best. Whatever that is, if you're buying kibble products, they come in a bag that has sort of a plasticized, waxy lining inside the bag. That is there to help keep the food fresh. So the worst thing that you can do is buy a huge bag of kibble, dump it out of the kibble into another, usually it's a big plastic clear tote to scoop it out of there. That is the worst thing you can do. That food will become rancid very quickly. It needs to be stored in the bag, and the bag needs to be tightly closed and sealed after every time you go in and get food out. And you should only buy a bag that is a size that you would finish in about 3 weeks. Because once it's opened, these foods are sprayed with fats to make them more palatable, or palatable at all, because they have zero taste. So they're sprayed with fats, and those fats become rancid when they're exposed to heat, air, and light. So you guys live in a very hot environment. If we dump that food out of that bag, store it in something where the humidity is getting to it, air is getting to it, light is getting to it, it becomes rancid very, very quickly. And the other thing that we get is storage mites. So when we have pets with allergies, okay, great. Well, we're just feeding them mites. Let's just add to the problems that they have. So if you're going to feed kibble, I once had a client with a 5-pound Chihuahua. He told me that he bought a 50-pound bag of Purina dog chow once a year, and it fed the dog for the whole year, and it only cost him $7 for the year. I kind of just looked at the dog and said, boy, can you come home with me, because that is horrible. And I did try to at least convince the client to buy smaller bags, something a little better, and buy it more often. So all these preservatives, a lot of them are carcinogenic. They've been banned in human food. Some of them have been banned in Europe, but they're still allowed in pet food, here at least, which you guys are getting the same thing. Okay, kibble is also, I said, it's very, very high in carbohydrates. So for our kitty cats in particular, that is really horrible. Leads to obesity, it leads to diabetes, and it leads to chronic inflammation. So carbohydrates break down to sugar. What does sugar cause? Obesity, diabetes, and inflammation. The other thing that we see when we look at blood sugar levels, the blood glucose on your blood testing, animals that are fed a high meat diet, whether it's raw, gently cooked, whatever, animals that are fed a diet that is very, very low in carbohydrates, their normal blood sugar is going to be about 75 to 80, versus animals that are fed a high carbohydrate, aka kibble diet, their normal blood sugar is going to be 115 to 120. And that means the pancreas is working a lot harder to spit out insulin, to break that down and get that sugar into the cells. So what is healthier? Well, when we have cancers and other inflammatory diseases, one of the things we want to do is keep that blood sugar as low as possible. So when we're feeding a kibble diet that keeps the blood sugar at a higher level chronically, we get more chronic pancreatitis, and we get just the pancreas saying, I give up, I can't do this anymore, and then we end up with diabetic problems. Interestingly, one of the arguments I get is that, oh, kibble will keep their teeth clean. That's a total myth. This is like your dentist saying to you, here, eat crackers, eat potatoes, your teeth will be great. Don't worry about it. You never have to brush them. You don't have to come in and see me. Just eat crackers all the time. Perfect. No, doesn't work that way. Kibble actually contributes to dental disease because it's sugar. We're coating the teeth with sugar products. If they chew it at all, cats, if you've ever noticed when your cat regurgitates or vomits after eating their big dry food meal, it comes up looking exactly like it went down. It's not chewed, it's not digested, it's just big old chunks that they swallow. If we want to use the argument that kibble is going to help keep dental disease under control, then we have to feed a very large piece of kibble that has a very large matrix in it. So there is a prescription diet called TD. I don't know if any of the other companies are making it, but Hills makes the TD. Except that is not a complete diet. It is not meant to be fed long term. It is not meant to be fed as the only thing the pet eats. And cats hate it. It's no better. It only works because of the mechanical abrasion of the teeth. And I think that we can find much better ways to have mechanical abrasion of the teeth by feeding bones, by feeding chicken gizzards or turkey gizzards are one of my favorite. I call it nature's toothbrush. Whether you cook it or feed it raw, I don't care. But a gizzard is the crop or stomach of the poultry. So it can be duck, pick a bird, it doesn't matter. But it has something called epichitin lining it, and that's what grinds. It's a very hard calcified surface, and that is when it's grinding, that's what grinds and breaks down the seed that the poultry eat. So when our cats chew on it, it is a mechanical abrasion on the teeth. So I understand and I get it because I have a bunch of cats. Cats do not really like having their teeth brushed. They really don't like having drops or sprays put on their teeth. So if we can give them something that is mechanically going to help with the dental care, that's a lot easier. So most cats like gizzards, so it's a kind of an easy thing to do, but certainly things like chicken necks or anything like that is going to be really good for their teeth, but kibble is not going to do it. So another problem with kibble is that it is a very, very dry product. So look at all my outdoor cats who are out there catching mice, catching rabbits, catching birds. Does it make me sad to see the wildlife decreasing? Yes. However, our barn is full of mice and I don't like a lot of mice in the barn, so yay cats. But if we look at what they're eating, mice are 75-80% moisture. There's a lot of moisture in a mouse, there's a lot of moisture in a rabbit, there's a lot of moisture in a bird. The moisture level in kibble is about 6%. So we are taking cats who are basically desert animals and do not drink very much. If you watch your cats, if you see them drink once a day, that's kind of a lot. Like they just really don't. So when we feed them a product that is only 6% moisture, where does the moisture come from to digest that food? We have to have moisture added to that food in order for it to process and grind and break down in the digestive system. Well, they're taking it from their own cells. So it's an intracellular drain to get that moisture because they just don't drink enough. And if you have a cat, and actually any animal who is eating a dry food, and then you switch them over to a high moisture diet, whether that's a home cooked or commercially cooked, gently cooked, even going to a canned food or going to a raw food, all of a sudden you don't ever see them drink. It's so rare for me to see my cats drink, really rare, because they're on this really high moisture diet. So when we feed them this low moisture diet and we look at urine concentration, so this is for the vets out there, when we look at urine concentration in cats and we look at the specific gravity, many of these cats that are being fed dry kibble, their urine specific gravity is greater than 1070. And for, cats that are doing a little better than that, we're still going to see urine specific gravities like 1050. That's not where we want it to be. When we have that high urinary concentration, that's when we get high crystal formation and lower urinary tract disease and stone formation. What we want is we want that specific gravity in our cats, and cats are always going to be higher than dogs anyway, but we want that urine specific gravity to be like 1030. 1025 to 1030 is ideal. It's like, oh look, the kidneys are working, they're concentrating the urine, they're doing what they need to do, but they're not being taxed by having this really high concentration. So for those who are not veterinarians and want an easy way to think of this, I go back to my 5th grade science lab. Take a glass of warm water and start shaking, I don't care if it's sugar or salt, something that is a crystal. Start putting it in the water, and you're stirring it around in your warm water, and the crystals keep dissolving, and they keep dissolving, and the water stays clear until you get it so concentrated that now the crystals are falling out to the bottom because it's super saturated and it can't dissolve anymore. Well, that's what happens with our cats with this really concentrated urine. It just cannot dissolve and absorb any more of those crystals. So we get the crystal formation, and then that makes sludge in the bladder, and then we have urinary obstruction and all kinds of other problems. So if for no other reason, and in my practice, I cured so many cats with chronic urinary tract disease by just saying, hey, let's get rid of dry kibble. Not, hey, let's use a prescription diet that is dry. That's an oxymoron. Here, have a dry product to solve a problem that is caused by a dry product. Like, no. So if you still have this huge need to feed a prescription product, then please at least make it a high moisture canned diet. One of the reasons that those prescription diets work, which there's a huge lawsuit with Hills right now because there's nothing prescription in there, there's no medication in there, but many of these urinary diets have methionine added to them, which basically is a urinary acidifier, so that will dissolve struvite crystals it's not going to do anything for oxalate crystals. And I find more issues with oxalate problems with my cats where my patients where the urine pH is too low. But that's not a problem if they're on a high moisture diet. It's all just going to flush out. All right, pet food recalls in the past few years. I said I would talk about some of the issues, why I don't like commercial foods, particularly from the big companies. Pentobarbital contamination, that is euthanasia solution. It has no business being in our pet food. However, at a recent AFCO meeting, they had as their keynote speaker the head of DARPro Rendering, which is the largest rendering facility in the United States. And basically, they take all those dead animals that have died out in the field, whatever, however they died. You know, you have a cow that you put down because it's not making enough milk anymore. You have a cow who gets sick and gets cancer and it dies. Where does that go? That can't go to human food supply. So it gets picked up in these big trucks, transported in high heat, not refrigerated. And then it's all dumped and it sits outside in a huge decomposing pile in the sun. And then it all gets pushed into a huge cooking vat and cooked down. And so it's cooked at high heats to basically melt all the animal. And it's the whole animal that goes in, and it's a mix of animals that go in. And it can include dead zoo animals. It can include roadkill. It can include a lot of really bad things because this is how we get rid of these things. And after it's cooked, then it's actually, the fat goes to the top, so that's taken off, and that is tallow, and that very commonly is used as a fat product in the food, and that is commonly used for the spray to coat the outside of the kibble. And then the kind of sludgy part at the bottom is then dehydrated, and that's how we get meat meals and bone meals. So how does euthanasia solution get in there? Well, animals are euthanized. They are supposed to go on a different track, and we have had this problem as a huge issue here in the US. There are quite a few pet food companies that they're in this building, and in the building right next door, those same people also go collect all the roadkill and the dead animals. So they're supposed to be separate, and the ones that have been euthanized are supposed to go through a different process, and those are supposed to actually go to landfill or be used for fertilizer or something else. But funny how the two of them end up intertwined and the wrong animals end up in the wrong places. And we got very lucky. One client did not get very lucky, but a woman who happened to be a lawyer in California had 5 pugs, and she fed them a canned pet food that was called chunks of beef. And within 20 minutes of eating the food, all of the dogs were staggering, falling over, very sick. And she rushed them all to the veterinarian. One of them died. And the other 4 managed to survive, but one was seriously injured. And she was smart. She was a lawyer. Her vet was smart. They took the stomach contents, had them evaluated. They took the food that she still had left and had that evaluated, and it had very high levels of euthanasia solution. And that was one of those plants where they've got the dead animals on this side and the euthanized animals on this side, and they were just using it all together. The bad news is their website said that they used all USDA inspected meat. The problem is they left out one word: condemned, inspected and condemned. All the condemned meat was going into their food. So I mentioned Pedigree earlier. That's one of the companies. Many companies have had their food tested, and pentobarbital is found in there. FDA has deemed it non-actionable because they said it's not at a high enough level. Well, I'm sorry, but any euthanasia solution at all is not acceptable in my pet's food, but FDA thinks it's just fine. And the guy from the Rendering Association, in his speech, he said, it is virtually impossible to have rendered products in pet food that do not have euthanasia solution. And so everybody's sweeping it under the rug and saying, absolutely fine. Now, in the late 1990s, as veterinarians, we knew this was a problem because when we would go to euthanize an animal, we would give them the recommended dose of euthanasia solution, and they would just sit there looking at us, and they wouldn't die. And then we would give another dose, and they would sit there and look at us and maybe be a little sleepy. And we were having to use triple and quadruple doses to get animals to actually pass over in a euthanasia situation. And the reason being, there had been so much pentobarbital in their food, and this is when FDA started testing for it back in the late 90s. They don't test for it anymore because they don't care. But what they found was that the animals had been, basically their liver had been primed with enough euthanasia solution that it learned how to process it. It developed the enzyme system to process it, and so it didn't affect them. So, I mean, if we have things at that, so what has happened? They've just upped the dose that we're supposed to give. To me, that's not acceptable. Like, that is, we don't change the rules because we don't want to enforce the rules. It's just, anyway, government. All right, so then we had the excess vitamin D in canned and dry foods. Well, Hill's was the biggest offender with this, but many companies were affected. And the reason they were affected is because they're all using the same synthetic vitamin mineral mix. It comes as a powder, it's mixed in the food. Why do they have to add all these excess vitamins and minerals? Well, we looked at it. It's because they know the ingredients are inferior. They know they have to meet those minimums. They know that, especially with dry food, when the food has been processed, all the ingredients have been processed at high heat multiple times over by the time it gets into the food, because it has to go through that cooking process to render it, and then it goes through a dehydration process, and then it goes through the extruder at high heat, and then after it goes through the extruder, it goes through a second dehydration process. So it's cooked at high heat. There's not a lot of nutrition left. What do they have to do? They add in these synthetic vitamin mineral mixes. Well, one mix came in with, somebody missed a decimal point on the vitamin D. And what does excess vitamin D cause? Oh yeah, kidney failure, death. And so we knew about this in November of whatever year this was, a few years ago. We knew about it in November. Hill's waited until February and March to start doing their recalls. How many tens of thousands of animals died or were put into kidney failure in that period of time because they weren't willing to step up to the plate and go, oh yeah, we need to recall millions of pounds of food. So huge problem. They knew about it and still ignored it. Aflatoxins in canned and dry foods. Aflatoxins are mold toxins. So we get mold in grains when the huge trucks of grain are brought in, whether it's corn, oats, wheat, you name it. They're brought in these huge open container trucks. And the corn is graded levels 1 through 5. Grade 1, grade 2, that goes to human food. Where does everything else go? Well, it can be made into things like high fructose corn syrup, but it also can go to pet food. So where do the farmers try to hide this food, the contaminated food? In the pet food trucks. So what'll happen is it'll have really icky, moldy corn in there, and then the top layer looks really good. And then when it gets to the pet food plant, they are supposed to do a core sample, which is a little tiny, it's like a rod that they stick down in there and pull up a tiny sample of corn, and they look at it and go, yeah, looks good to me. But they also spray those trucks, they fumigate those trucks with something to kill the mold because they don't want to see live mold in there. The only problem is when you kill a mold, it releases a toxin called an aflatoxin. So Midwest Pet Foods here about a year or so ago had the largest recall ever in pet food for aflatoxins, because what do aflatoxins cause? Liver failure. So a lot of times if you have a patient or a pet who is eating a commercial product and their liver enzymes are starting to really shoot up, look at the food that is being fed and consider, could there be aflatoxins in that food? Do we have grains in that food? Every year they put out a report in the US about the percentage of contamination in the different grains that are produced. And usually the mold contamination runs about 65 to 70%. So most of the grain is pretty highly contaminated. So something to be aware of even with yourselves. So then we also have bacterial contamination, and the weird thing is this is where FDA has decided to put all their enforcement power, because they are so against raw food. Why are they against raw food? Because their big influencers are the big pet food companies that don't sell raw food. They sell kibble and grain-based products. So they have been, for the past few years, really targeting raw food and testing raw food like nobody's business, and pretty much ignoring the big manufacturers and the kibble and can manufacturers. However, especially with salmonella, we've never had a person in this country, we've never had a person get ill from handling a raw food product. However, with salmonella, however, we have had people die and get ill, pretty large numbers, from handling salmonella contaminated kibble. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One, our pets, cats and dogs, have a very low stomach pH. So if the food's a little bit contaminated, their stomach pH is going to kill it. It's not going to be an issue for them. People who handle raw food, it's no different than handling raw meat that you're making for your family. And by the way, about 60% of poultry products, probably more, in the grocery store are contaminated. The regulatory authorities know that, but their assumption is that you're going to cook it and you're not going to eat it raw, so you're going to kill any bacteria that is there. When we're feeding a raw product to our pets, it's assumed that we're going to feed it raw, therefore it's not being cooked, and therefore if there's bacterial contamination, it could be a problem. Well, people who regularly feed raw food to their pets are very good about cleaning up where they've handled raw food, where they've cut up raw food, where they've served raw food. Kibble, people are just like, oh, that's fine. And so they throw it in the bowl and it sits there all day sometimes. So the animals are grazing and children in the household are going over and playing with it and sometimes sampling it. So salmonella contamination is definitely possible in kibble as well as raw food. But it's not handled in the same way. So people just assume it's safe. It's not any safer, and probably worse because we just don't have any concerns about handling it. So excess thyroid hormone, so in cats, when we get high thyroid hormone levels, we're like, oh, he's hyperthyroid. It doesn't really happen in dogs. If they have that in dogs, it's a thyroid tumor, which we just don't see them very often. So when we suddenly start seeing a spike in high thyroid levels, we need to look at the food, particularly in the raw foods, but the gullet meat, which is up here, is not used in human food. So that is a place where we can get extra meat and things for the raw feeders or for the pet food industry. If the thyroid gland is not stripped out of the cow, sheep, pig, whatever it is that we're feeding, then we have excess thyroid hormone in the food. So all of a sudden we'll see animals that have high thyroid. So again, if you have a hyperthyroid animal, look at the food that's being fed and consider, could this actually be something that's coming from the food rather than true hyperthyroid disease? Plastic and metal pieces, we see social media posts about that all the time being in food. There's reasons why it's in there. So when you process the whole cow, they have ear tags, they have chains, they have in their stomachs, in the rumen, from being on the farm, they have hardware disease. They've ingested nails and screws and all kinds of things. And so when the food actually goes down the conveyor belt, they have these huge magnets, and the magnets are to pull out all those metal pieces that accidentally got processed with the animal. Unfortunately, the magnets don't pick up plastic, so we can get plastic pieces in there as well. Insufficient thiamine, this is a bigger deal in cats than dogs because cats have a much higher thiamine requirement. And so if there's not enough thiamine in the food, if it hasn't been formulated correctly, then we get blindness, neurologic disease, and dead cats. Mold contamination, so this is where we actually didn't kill the mold is still growing, and we see that mostly in refrigerated products. Okay, so quality of pet food ingredients, I kind of, mentioned this before. Human grade, not in most pet foods, but boy, when I am making food, I want human grade ingredients. I want USDA inspected and passed ingredients. My pets deserve no less than what I would feed my family. So human grade, yes. Are carbohydrates necessary? AFCO and FEDIAF, in their huge manuals of how much of every ingredient, how much of all the B vitamins, all the fat soluble vitamins, all the amino acids, it's a huge manual, you have to pay for it. Nowhere in there does it have a minimum requirement for carbohydrates, because our pets have zero requirement for carbohydrates in their diet. Yet we are feeding them diets that are 60% carbs. Makes no sense. But what is cheaper to put in food? Carbs or protein? And which protein is cheaper? Plant protein or meat protein? So what are the, if all you're concerned about is your bottom line, and you know that you can basically keep animals alive by feeding them the lower quality food, which are you going to do if you're the big pet food company? So they don't require carbohydrates, but we are feeding them very high carb meals, and this is much more important for our cats than our dogs. If you want to have a vegan or vegetarian cat, don't talk to me. I won't formulate for that. In my practice, if somebody wanted to make their cat a vegan or a vegetarian, I wouldn't even take them as a client because I knew they were going to die. They were going to die a really horrible death with super infections, cardiomyopathies, muscle weakness. It was just kind of a nightmare, and I wouldn't do it. Carcinogenic preservatives. This will get out of the way. So the ingredients that I have up here, this is just one of those really crappy, low quality ingredients. So we have beef byproduct. Well, byproducts get a bad name, but byproducts are basically the parts that people don't want to eat. The liver, the heart, the tongue, the spleen, the kidneys. Those are actually really good. However, when we're looking at it from this kind of pet food, not good, because they're including parts that we would not normally eat. So like poultry byproducts or poultry meal. First of all, we don't even know which poultry that is. Is it chicken? Is it duck? Is it turkey? Who knows? But even if it says chicken byproducts or chicken meal, this came up at an AFCO meeting a few years ago, and it was really amazing that the people actually doing the regulations had no clue that this is how things are done. Pretty weird. But chickens, when they're processed for pet food, so for instance, we had floods here in North Carolina a few years ago, and a bunch of the poultry or chicken farms got flooded. So all these chickens drowned in their chicken houses. Well, what are you going to do with 10 million dead chickens? Well, they're rotting and putrid. What did they do with them? They sent them off to pet food. These chickens that have been dead in stagnant water for days, sent them off to pet food and rendered them. They did not take off all the feathers. They didn't take off the heads. Like the entire, millions of the entire chicken got rendered. So when we look at those products, it's like, okay, the intestines are in there. All the feces is in there. Fecal transplants, yeah, maybe not so bad. But just imagine when you cook down a putrid, rancid carcass that's been floating in stagnant water for days. There's got to be all kinds of toxins in there, but they didn't want to waste it, so it went to pet food. So if we look over on the right-hand side, we see carcinogenic dyes in here that have been banned from human food, banned in Europe, but for some reason, having yellow 5 and red 40 makes perfect sense in pet food because, our pets really care about what color their food is. Not so much. This one I don't think. They have calcium propionate as a preservative, sorbic acid, which is vitamin C, as a preservative. A lot of these are still using BHA and BHT and ethoxyquin, which are known carcinogens, but they're being used. Propylene glycol is another one that is used as a preservative. If you see those, run fast. The biggest problem with ethoxyquin, it actually is banned on the label, and it's supposedly not allowed to be used in pet food. However, ethoxyquin is commonly used to preserve fish and fish meal. And if it's put on the fish or fish meal at sea on the boat and not at the pet food plant, then it's allowed to be in there. And you don't have to label it, so you don't even know if that is in there. Rancid fats, we talked about those because they're sprayed on. And most recently, AFCO decided, they do this quite commonly, if there's enough backlash from the pet parent community, they'll just change the name of something. So recently they changed, it used to be that you would see corn gluten as a ingredient. Now they changed the name to protein. So it'll just say corn protein. And you're like, is there any gluten in there? I don't know, because it says protein. And then another one that they changed quite a few years ago, and I like to think I had something to do with this, because man, I really railed about this one. There is a prescription diet. It is a hydrolyzed diet for allergy pets, pets with IBD, skin allergies, whatever, which, by the way, all that's being caused by the crap in the food. But, and by the way, I have no filter, so I you know, excuse me for saying bad things about pet food, but this is what I am.
No, we're enjoying every bit of your words. No, honestly, we are.
So, there is a product which is hydrolyzed chicken feathers. So basically, the protein and main food source in this dry diet is chicken feathers that have been broken down. And it used to say that on the label. And, you know, I was like, really? We're paying $90 a bag for chicken feathers? Like, who in their right mind would say, oh, chicken feathers is an appropriate meal for my dog or cat? And so AAFCO was nice enough to change it. It is now poultry protein isolate or hydrolysate. Yeah, go figure. How would you know that that is chicken feathers? So that's the games that they play. All right. So here's an interesting one. In 2017, they tested more than 170 dry and canned complete based on, you know, the computer model. 94% of the canned and 62% of the dry formulations were not compliant with AAFCO guidelines, which means they didn't even have the minimums that were required. So we think, you know, this is the complete and balanced myth. When you go to the store and you buy a food, you are assuming that it has everything that your cat needs, except maybe 94% of them don't and 62% of them don't. So, yeah, not so much. We can do better.
I actually saw that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that study. It was like, I was like, oh,
yeah.
wow.
So, you know, for the veterinarians who say you have to use something that's been formulated by a nutritionist at Hills or Purina or wherever, no, it still doesn't work because they're formulating using a computer model. And again, we talked about ingredients can vary, animals' utilization of the ingredients can vary, and so it's a best guess scenario. Now, this is where I was talking about optimum versus minimum. So AAFCO says for adult cats, 26% protein, all good. Kittens, 30%, perfect. Yeah. So if we give cats the chance to choose their own, what are they going for? 52% protein, 46% fat, 2% fiber. This is how we need to be formulating for our cats. And by the way, that 52% protein can't be coming from oats and peas. It's just not going to do the job for them. So when I formulate meals, I am looking at these 52% protein diets, and then I get the backlash of, oh my gosh, too much protein, it's going to wreck their kidneys. No, it's not. It's what they're meant to eat. You know, I also get I did allergy testing and my pet is allergic to every protein. I'm like, no, they're not. They would be dead. That is impossible to be allergic to every protein. So you just have to, you know, it just means they have a lot of gut health issues. So this is what we should be looking at for our kitty cats. We should not be saying, oh, 26%, that's great. No, it's not. Okay, so superfood toppers and herbs, if you, you know, for whatever reason, you still have to use kibble as your base, or you're using something that is commercial that you're not sure really how good it is, these are things that you can use as toppers. Eggs are almost the best superfood in the world. They are pretty close to a complete diet. So we have our own chickens, and anytime we have a cracked egg or a pecked egg or a thin-shelled egg, guess who gets it? Oh, the kitty cats, and they are thrilled. Like they're standing in line at the chicken coop in the morning going, how many are we getting today? I feed raw eggs to my animals. It's no problem. They're for quite a while, and even in my first book, I perpetuated it and then learned better that if you feed too many raw egg whites, it will destroy the B vitamins. It doesn't. You can feed all the raw egg whites as long as you're feeding the yolk along with it. There's plenty of protein in there. You're not going to have an issue. Even our kitty cats, berries have great antioxidants. So if they like them, they can eat blueberries and cranberries and that sort of thing. Dark leafy greens, again, our kitty cats need a very, very small amount of fiber, but I'll see my cats out there grazing. You know, and a lot of people with indoor cats will grow cat grass, which is, you know, baby wheatgrass and that sort of thing. So sprouts and those sort of things are very, very beneficial for our kitties, and a lot of them love them. So given the chance, they're like, yeah, let me go eat some of that stuff, and part of it is fiber. That fiber is feeding the gut bacteria, so it's the prebiotic for the probiotics, which those gut bacteria are responsible for a lot of the immune system. They make short chain fatty acids, they make a lot of the vitamins that our animals need. And so, you know, cats are not so much poop eaters, but we'll see a lot of dogs who are poop eaters, and basically they're just giving themselves a microbiome transplant. So I know we get skeeved out, but it's like, yeah, they kind of need that. So a lot of times if our cats are catching wild prey and they're eating the intestines, they're basically doing a fiber transplant and a microbiome transplant, and that is absolutely fine. So small fish, lean meats, any of these things can be added to, particularly if you're feeding a less than stellar diet, if we can add in these things. The mushrooms and the veggies, the dark leafy greens, those need to be processed somehow. So either steam them, gently saute them in some coconut oil or a healthy oil, or run them through a food processor so that the cell walls of the plant are broken down. Mushrooms, if we really want to get the medicinal benefits, where we want those beta glucans and all that really good anti-cancer stuff from the mushrooms, they really do need to be cooked in some way. So chop them up, saute them, steam them, whatever that is. Most cats absolutely love them, particularly if you cook them in an oil that they really like. So like a virgin organic olive oil or coconut oil, they will chow down on those, and they're just very good for the microbiome. Okay, so this is where I was kind of talking about the short chain fatty acids and what happens in the lower bowel. So the gut flora is responsible for more than 90% of serotonin production, which is the feel-good hormone. So we all want that. And if we disrupt that with poor quality food, medications, chemicals like flea and tick chemicals, then we destroy that microbiome. And when we destroy that, we have negative psychological consequences because we're not making so much serotonin. And so there's a huge association between gut microbiome and aggression. I had a cat, and now that I know Chinese medicine, I have a lot more reasons that I know why she was a little angry. But she literally liked to live on top of my dryer, and we had to go by there on the way out of the house to get to the backyard. And every time you walk by, this cat literally would reach out and just slap you. If the dog walked by, he was getting the boxing gloves. And she was just angry all the time. And that was before I knew what I know now about diet. So that cat was she was still eating some dry kibble. She might have been getting some canned, but she was not being raw fed at that point because I wasn't to that point in my progression of learning. And she was angry all the time. So if we have an angry animal, we need to look at what is their microbiome doing. So the bacteria, like I said, produce the short chain fatty acids, which produce butyrate, which is an antidepressant. And raw diets, BARF is biologically appropriate raw fed diets, increase GABA, which is a calming agent also made in the brain. So when we look at all this stuff, it's like, wow, we better take care of the microbiome because it's responsible not only for the immune system, but also brain. So we have a lot of new studies looking at the gut-brain axis, how the gut affects what is going on upstairs. We look at it more in dogs because people tend to interact more with their dogs, take their dogs places, so they want them to behave well. But we also need to look at this for our kitty cats. We look at statistically over 90% of indoor cats are stressed. Well, probably over 90% of indoor cats are also eating dry kibble. So maybe we can make them a little less stressed and give them some feel-good hormones if we feed them an appropriate diet. So with heat processing, I'm a huge raw fan, if you haven't noticed, but gently cooked is also fine. But I find that our kitty cats, for the most part, once we teach them how to eat raw food, they're much happier with that. But with heat processing, B vitamins are responsible for production of serotonin and melatonin. Again, feel good, mellow out. So with dry food storage of 6 months, look how much our vitamins fell. And then in canned foods, which are cooked at a lower temperature than kibble, B6 fell by 89%. So we're losing a lot in that processing. And there's just some examples of where those vitamins come from. Diets deficient in omega-3 fatty acids result in aggression and stress behaviors and a lot of inflammation, and they decrease learning ability. And by the way, cats are very trainable if you have the right treats to train them with. So AFCO's recommendation of omega-6 to 3, because we do need the 6s, that's our linoleic acid. We do need 6s, but their recommendation is 30 to 1, but really ideal is 5 to 1 or even 3 to 1. 25% of dry foods contain 0 EPA and DHA, which are the omega-3s. So the pet food companies are not testing their food because fatty acids and fats are really destroyed when heat processed, and then we get rancidity. So if you're making your own food and if you're cooking food and you're adding omega-3s, which would be like a fish oil or a phytoplankton or a krill oil, calamari oil, any of those sea-based oils, you want to add those at the time of feeding, not before cooking. If you're just grinding food and freezing raw food, you can put the omega-3s in with it. But when you feed, the food has to be at room temperature to body temperature. You cannot, do not serve your cats cold food. First of all, they don't like it because it doesn't have the aroma. They don't like touching with their mouth the raw food. So we need to feed it at body temperature at least, or room temperature at least, and then up to body temperature. So that's, you guys are in centigrade, so I'm not even going to go there. So we want to make, and from a Chinese medicine perspective, the digestive system hates cold, it hates damp, so we have to have that food warmed up for them. So if you have food that you're taking out of the refrigerator, you've made a big batch, or you're feeding a commercial raw food that's been frozen, make sure you thaw it out and then get it up to room temperature. Cats don't really like their food really soupy, so adding hot water to it is not the best option for cats. But if you take that container, whether it's in a plastic bag or a plastic, whatever your container is that the food is in, take that and sit it in a bottle or in a bowl of warm water and let it warm itself up. It'll do it pretty quickly, and then you're not diluting the food. But we don't want to cook these omegas. All right, so if any pet with a behavioral problem needs to be moved from a commercial kibble to a home prepared one that is low glycemic, especially for cats, or to a raw or freeze-dried product. And I have had, there's actually a TV show over here, I don't know if it's over there, called The Cat from Hell. Like these cats that are literally attacking everyone.
Jackson Galaxy, isn't it?
Yeah, so let's just change their diet. At least that should be the starting point. So, and we don't, I'm sure on those TV shows, they're not looking at that. So, so different ways you can do this. If you're new to doing something other than a commercial kibble or canned, there are base mixes and meal balancers. I don't know what you guys have over there, but we have some over here where it's like, here's a base mix, add your meat, add your oil, boom, done. When I am looking for brands of food, whether it is a raw, a freeze-dried, a canned, a kibble, which you're not going to find them, but I want whole food ingredients to make up the food. So, and whether you have whole food ingredients versus a synthetic vitamin mineral mix, when you're reading the label, it's like, oh, chicken, pumpkin, chicken liver, chicken heart, and then it starts this scientific list of, sodium bicarbonate and calcium this and that and copper sulfate. When you start seeing all that, that's the vitamin mix. And that's where we get into trouble, because if there is a decimal point in the wrong place, it's a problem. So, because what happens is these companies are not testing their food after it's made. Like they have a computer program that says, this is the ingredients that we need, this is what needs to go in there, boom, done. And then it doesn't get tested before it leaves the plant. And it will only get tested if we have enough animals die and enough pet owners or veterinarians who go, wow, why am I suddenly seeing a bunch of animals with kidney failure? And start putting 2 and 2 together. So feeding guidelines, if you're making your own food, for kittens, we need 60 to 65 calories per pound of body weight per day. And for adult cats, it's about 25 calories per pound of body weight per day. So meat, organ, fish, and egg content should be 75 to 80% of the meal. If you're using any fruits and non-starchy veggies, no more than 5 to 10%. I like to color the rainbow, so I might have a little bit of red pepper in there, a little bit of dark leafy green, maybe a little bit of yellow squash. So I like to see all the colors because I know if I'm seeing all those colors, I'm getting a really good mix of vitamins. Organs, heart, spleen, tripe, tongue, those all count as muscle meat. So sometimes you'll see pet foods and the first ingredient, you're like, where's the muscle meat? And it'll have heart. Well, heart is muscle. It's the hardest working muscle in the body. It actually has the highest taurine and carnitine content of anything in the body. So it actually makes, and guess what? For the human food industry, it's traditionally a throwaway. So, you know, that's when you can go to the butcher or to the market and say, can you get me hearts? We buy a ton of chicken hearts and turkey hearts in our grocery store. We went there one week and they had a bunch of chicken hearts in the meat section. And we were like, oh, we'll take all of those. And then the next week we went and there weren't any. And so we went to the guy who runs the meat department and said, hey, there was a whole bunch of chicken hearts and we bought them all. How come there's no more? And he said, oh, we got those by accident. And we said, well, could you accidentally get them every week? And he does. So now we use them for treats for our animals. Interestingly, I offered them to the cats and they were still cold. And they said, no way, no how. And when I warmed them up, they were like, oh, awesome. Love these. So again, that speaks to cats do not like their food cold. Cats don't like leftovers either. So if you're making big batches of food, it's a little tricky with kitty cats. You've got to make sure that you warm it up and make it appear to be something brand new because they don't like leftovers. So when I'm formulating things for kitty cats, literally over 90% of the meal is going to be meats, organs, bone content if we're doing raw, but we do need a calcium source no matter what. Fats and oils. Adult and immature cats require at least 9% of fat in their diet, but we looked at what cats choose. They want like 46% fat, so 9% is a minimum. It's a bare minimum. Because those fatty acids are critical for all these different things, nerve transmission, anti-inflammatory. So if we want to prevent heart disease, we better have some omegas in there. But they're also used for making hormones. They're a huge part of the immune system, and it makes the food more palatable and satiety. It makes them feel more full. If you fed a cat, and so we don't hear this quite as much in the cat world as we do in the dog world, but somebody posted the other day, my veterinarian told me my dog needs a 0-fat meal. And I said, well, then your animal is dead. Like, you cannot feed a 0-fat meal and expect your animal to survive. So if you have an animal who's had problems with chronic pancreatitis is an inflammatory problem. It is made even worse by diets that are high in carbohydrates that break down to sugars, so dry food. And so we get these prescription diets that are low-fat kibbles for animals with chronic pancreatitis is absolutely the worst thing we could do. Here, have some more carbs. Let's stress your pancreas some more. Gee, I wonder why they still have smoldering chronic pancreatitis. On the other hand, we look at animals that are on a ketogenic diet, which is 70% fat, but it is fed raw. They never have pancreatitis. It's not an issue. Fats are not the problem. It is other things that are contributing, poor microbiome health, processed foods. That's where we get into trouble with pancreatitis. So don't ever think that your cat needs this low-fat diet. They actually would prefer a 46% fat diet, but it can't be cooked fats because remember, when fats are exposed to heat, air, and light, they become rancid. So if I'm making my own to start, I do start with a 90 to 93% lean just to kind of get them kind of over into it. And especially if you're cooking, we want to be aware of those rancid fats. We need some sort of an omega-6 linoleic acid because we need both. So that's going to come from a plant source. So flaxseed or hemp seed oil we can add in there. For our EPA and DHA, which are our omega-3s, they really come best from fish products. There's one veterinarian over here who tells people never to feed their cats fish because it'll cause urinary problems, but I have never found that to be the case. However, with that said, I do not want my cats on all fish diets. We do, I did an interview with a board certified veterinary dentist. The foral lesions, the resorptive lesions in the teeth have been associated with high fish diets in cats. So my cats eat a little bit of fish, but not a lot of fish, but we get their omegas in the form of fish oils or phytoplankton, algae oils, that sort of thing. And egg yolks are also high in omega-3, not as high as the sea-based products, but egg yolks are another good place to find omega-3s. So again, omega-3 considers 30 to 1 adequate. It is not. Ideal is less than 6 to 1, so I supplement everybody with some omegas. Mineral balance, this is really for if you are interested in making your own food. We need a calcium to phosphorus ratio 1.1 to 1 up to 2 to 1. Usually we stick kind of in the lower ranges. So that's going to be 800 to 1,000 milligrams of calcium per pound of homemade food. So you can do that with a teaspoon of organic eggshell powder. A teaspoon of bone meal powder is very commonly a contaminated product, so be very careful with that. Make sure your sourcing is really good. If you're feeding raw, then ground bone can be 10% of the recipe, and then I have per pound of food of feeding raw 5 ounces of chicken, quail, or duck frames. So that would be like the backs, the necks, the wings, that sort of thing. And that'll get you your calcium source. Mineral balance, sodium and chloride are critical for nerve and muscle cell function. I see this more with, the biggest problem that I see is animals with heart disease, and the cardiologists say low salt diet. And I'm like, yeah, but you need sodium and chloride. So we don't need a ton. Now I was just informed this weekend that sea salt apparently is pretty high in microplastic contamination, which never heard of that. Himalayan pink salt is much less likely to have any contamination, so probably should substitute sea salt with Himalayan pink salt. Zinc we get from eggs, pork, beef liver, oysters, wheatgrass, or we can open a zinc capsule, about 15 milligrams per pound of food. We'll get our zinc where we need it to be. Iodine we certainly need for thyroid health, so we usually add a little tiny bit of kelp to that. Again, be careful in your sourcing with kelp. We have a lot of contaminated waters in this country, or in this world. I tend to look for kelp products from Ireland, Norway, Sweden, that kind of neck of the world. They tend to be a little cleaner. Manganese is important for tendon and ligament health, so turmeric is a great source of that, and turmeric has a lot of other good properties for fighting cancer, good for heart function, energy, so a lot of times we'll add a little bit of that in there. Vitamin A, we should be able to get no problem just in our normal formulations with liver, dairy, eggs. Vitamin D, this is the one where we have to be really careful, so I do recommend testing. And that is something that the veterinary labs can do, but sources of vitamin D are fish, dairy, egg yolks, liver. I'm actually a huge fan of raw milk. I like goat milk. Goat or sheep milk better for our cats because it's closer to what cat milk would be. Cow milk, a lot of cats will get diarrhea with that, so we're a little more careful there. Vitamin E is in some of our seeds and oils, so if we're using a little bit of the flax or hemp seed oil for our linoleic acid, we'll also get our vitamin D. And vitamin K, I rarely have a problem with that if we've got some liver in the diet, and the organs are pretty critical. What happens is I get people who say, oh, I'm going to make my own food, and they say, okay, I'm doing chicken, rice, and peas, which doesn't even come close to being balanced. So we either need to get, one of those synthetic vitamin mineral supplements, or we got to add more ingredients. And organs are going to be the ingredients that are going to be really huge, and they're just so nutrient dense that I like to use them. And with liver, if you get too high with the liver, more than about 10% of the diet, then you get a little bit of soft stool. So that is your indication that we need to back off and be really careful. Liver is the filtering organ of the body. It's the detoxifier. So try to find the cleanest liver sources that you can, not those confinement raised animals where we've got a lot of toxins in there. Water soluble vitamins B and C. Usually don't have an issue getting those, except for thiamine in kitty cats, but organ meats again, fish, eggs, beef. There are a couple of formulators. The one that I use is the Animal Diet Formulator from Royal Animal Health University. It works brilliantly because I like to formulate using all whole foods and not using synthetic supplements. So that's why I really like that one. I have not tried the next three, the Pet Designer, the Best Mix, or the Animal Feed. And these are online, so you can get them in any country if you know, so particularly for veterinarians who are saying, okay, well, I'd like to design some diets for my patients, but I don't know how to do that and make sure that we have everything in there. This is a way to do that. Balance It is also available and really popular in the veterinary world. I hate it. And the reason I hate it is because they basically say pick one protein, one carb, and one vegetable, and then add the synthetic vitamin mineral mix. And I know that we can do better than that. First of all, I'm against the synthetic vitamin mineral mix because we get a lot of leaky gut, allergies, IBD when we throw synthetic things at our animals' bodies that they're like, what the heck is that? I don't know what that is. But also, we have zero requirement for carbohydrates. So why is that 1/3 of the diet? I just think it's a bad way to formulate. So I would much rather have more ingredients in my diet and have it be whole food ingredients, getting us where we need to be. So here's a sample cat food recipe. This one is balanced according to the formulator. Now, you know, it could be that you have a cat who's not going to absorb things as well. Cat food tends to be more nutrient dense. A lot of times the dog food will come out 30 to maybe 35 calories per ounce, but cat food tends to come in the 40 to 45 calorie per ounce range. This will make almost 3 pounds of food. Now, if you have a lot of cats, that's great. If you have one cat, you might want to divide this down and make a very small batch. So the oysters are in there for the zinc content. So if you can't get oysters, or if you have a seafood allergy, can't handle them, then that's where that 15 milligram zinc capsule could be added in here. So the hemp seed and wheat germ oil are to get our linoleic acids and our vitamin E. Again, I said we needed some salt in there, but you could make that Himalayan pink salt instead. And then our eggshell powder is our calcium source for the kitties. The kelp is the iodine source. And this is balanced. Most cats would eat this. However, you know, if you have a cat who has been on kibble, good luck. So there's a couple different ways, and I didn't put a slide in, but we were talking about this at the office, that I need to talk about how, if you have a cat who is addicted to kibble, which I went through this 20 years ago when I figured out that, oh, kibble is really not good for my cats. How do I get them to go from being carnivores to being carnivores and eating what they're supposed to eat? So I started out with frozen raw products, and they were these little round frozen pucks, and they literally treated it like a hockey puck and batted it around. And then, you know, I thawed it out, and they were like, I'm not touching that. That is not, like, cats are really driven by texture. So if they're used to eating something that's crunchy, good luck, because they look at raw food, and you have to warm that up to get the odors released and, you know, really stimulate that sense of, oh. And, you know, dogs will eat pretty much anything. And I even have problems when I bring in rescue dogs that have been fed kibble. They look at raw food and go, I have no idea what that is. It's a weird texture. They won't even stick their tongue in it. So for kitty cats, you have a couple of options. You can do the 2-plate test where you put their normal food out and then you put the new food, whatever that is. You put them side by side and just kind of keep tempting them, and make sure that your cooked or raw food is warmed up enough that it is releasing those odors. Like, it should be nice and smelly for them. My cats, the way that I got them transferred from one to the other was I knew that texture was a big deal. So what I did is I got freeze-dried raw food because it comes as a crunchy bit. And so I put their kibble in the bowl, and then I took my freeze-dried and I crumbled that over the top so that in the process of eating the kibble, they had to kind of take in some of that as well. And obviously not ideal because it's still a very low moisture product when served that way. However, I wanted them to get the taste, and they were only interested in texture at that point. And so over a period of a couple of weeks, I would increase the amount of the crumbled freeze-dried and decrease the amount of kibble till all that was left in the bowl was the freeze-dried. Then I started sprinkling water over it, or bone broth, and eventually got them to the point where it was rehydrated the way that I wanted it to be. And once they were eating that, then I started introducing the true raw product, and they were like, oh, still tastes good. Texture's not that different. And they were moved over. My most resistant cat took 6 months to get from point A to point B. And that's why in the bowls at the very beginning, I still had some kibble in the house because I was going through that transition of, oh, God, come on, let's go. So those are a couple of different ways that I have found that have worked for most of my clients. Every once in a while we get a resistant cat who is just like, no way, no how, I am not doing it. They make your life really miserable because you cannot rehydrate kibble to get it back to the point of what a mouse would be. It's just impossible to do unless you want to feed them this huge bowl of soup that they are not going to touch. So be patient with it, but really work toward it, because the health of the cat is going to be so much incredibly better. Sorry, I didn't realize I had another one. This is a kidney support recipe. So you'll notice that this one has a little bit of millet and sweet potato in it, which I normally would not use in my cat diets. I don't use grains, I don't use carbs. I would not use this kidney support recipe until a cat was in like stage 3 to stage 4. So one of the things that I see that is wrong in the veterinary industry is that the first sign of the kidneys are a little tweaked, so stage 1 or stage 2, we're immediately jumping to a low protein diet of like 9 to 11%. Well, remember, our cats want 52. So we're jumping to a 9% or 11% protein diet, and a lot of times it's in the form of a kibble. So, oh, we've got a kidney cat who's dehydrated and we're feeding them more things to dehydrate them, and we're not supplying enough protein for their heart to work well, for their muscles to work well. And so what we end up with very quickly is the walking cat skeleton, where they have lost all their muscle because we're not supplying enough protein for them, because they have really high protein requirements. So this I would not even use until these cats were in very late stage. But this has a lower phosphorus level because that's actually more important. But this is also a balanced diet for our kitties. All right, and yep, that's the last one. So let me stop the share, and then we can look at questions.
Hey, thank you. That was.
I don't know how long that took. It seemed like it was longer than I was supposed to be. So sorry.
Oh no, that's right. We enjoyed every bit of it, and it was very interesting. Some of the points that you brought up, like I didn't realize that the pentobarbital problem. I knew that dogs were dying from it, but I didn't know that they were building a resistance towards it at the same time. So that was very interesting, I thought. And so shall we look at the questions? We've got about 10 that's come in. And they're all in English, so that helps.
Yay, thanks, because I don't even know what your language is, but I'm sure I don't speak it. All right, I'm just going to start at the top. The best composition for a Maine Coon. So Maine Coons are no different than other cats. I mean, I know we all like to think that our breed is very, very specific. But what they really need is, just a very high quality human grade. We want our protein and fat levels to be way up there. We don't want what is being formulated for them right now. So I wouldn't say that they're any different. I will say that Maine Coons are definitely more prone to heart disease. So we want to make sure that our taurine levels are nice. Taurine and carnitine are way up there. Where are we going to get that? Oh yeah, meat, eggs. And we want omega-3s to be pretty high to protect the heart. And if you can get it into your cat, and there are liquid formulations, there are powder formulations, I would add CoQ10. I don't think we have as many studies in cats as we do in dogs, but CoQ10 is so protective for the heart. So with a breed who is prone to heart disease, Maine Coons are pretty big. I would probably be dosing them very similar to what we're dosing our 20-pound and under dogs, which would be 100 milligrams of CoQ10 twice a day. So that would be what I would be doing differently for them.
So I've got a HCM cat myself. I've got a HCM.
Well, there you go. CoQ10, taurine, carnitine, those are really critical. We find that magnesium deficiency and vitamin D deficiency. So be testing for those things, because vitamin D, if we give too much, we're going to kill them. So it's pretty critical to make sure that you're testing that vitamin D before you start supplementing that. Now, with that said, if you fed foods that were high in vitamin D, like a little bit of extra fish, like a little bit of salmon a couple times a week, or egg yolks, which are high in vitamin D. It'd be very hard to kill them with excess D from whole foods versus supplementation. Do cats more attract to the taste of raw food or the smell? It's definitely the smell is going to be your driving factor. Oh, another thing with cats that I should put in there is cats do not like their whiskers to touch their bowl. So we actually feed our cats. There's a thing over here called the Mind Pet Platter, but it's designed to mimic how they would eat their prey. But our cats eat on a flat platter. And with your water bowls for your kitty cats, make sure they're nice and wide. They don't like their whiskers to touch. So pretty critical when we're feeding them, and particularly if you're trying to get them interested in something new, don't get the whiskers in the way. There's actually a syndrome called whisker fatigue from their whisker fatigue eating things. So, but yeah, definitely smell is an important part. Do cats need fiber? Yes. So a couple things that you can use. I talked about it a little bit. They only need, 2-3% of fiber in their diet, but it is critical. And that's one of the reasons that we see hairball problems, constipation problems. But I find more constipation problems with cats that are fed diets that are too low in moisture. That is a huge issue. So I've solved so many constipation problems over the years by saying, okay, well, we got to get off the kibble. We're going to go on a high moisture diet and then have the appropriate fiber in there. So we can use pumpkin. Cats usually like that. Another really good source is coconut fiber, like dried coconut. Most cats love it. We actually have a hairball product over here that all it is dried little coconut flakes, and it is phenomenal. They like it. They eat it in their food, and it'll solve hairball problems. So you can also feed like ground whole prey that has the hair in it, like rabbit, that sort of thing. Over here, we can get rabbit, we can get guinea pig. Okay. If you feed raw food, do you still require to add any supplement or vitamin in the diet? How to ensure the food and nutrients are complete? So again, it depends. Are you buying pre-made raw food that is complete? It's a myth. But are you buying raw food that is complete, or are you making your own? And if you are making your own, I would strongly recommend getting one of these diet formulators and putting your food in there and seeing where you are. Because I was amazed. Like, I'm pretty good at just best guessing a diet, but when I put them in, I'm pretty amazed sometimes that it's like, wow, that's really close, but it's not 100%. 100%. So, like all those things that I ran through, we need that iodine source, we need that zinc source, we need that vitamin D, we definitely need that calcium. So you can put your stuff in a calculator and see. If you're using a pet food company, they should be able to give you the nutritional analysis. And that's one of the things I recommend that you ask for. Like, can I see the complete nutritional analysis of your food? And then in there, they should say meets AFCO or meets VetiAF or whatever. And that's one of the questions that you ask them. You just, dial them up and say, hey, can I see the nutrient analysis? How did you formulate that? Does it meet minimum requirements? And remember that minimum requirements are just that, a minimum.
Right.
Okay. Vets in Malaysia are almost obsessed with feeding kibble to cats. Of course. Laymen like me then feel obliged to buy the kibble. No, don't be obliged. Is it the same in the US? Oh yeah, they push kibble there. I mean, I would say 90% of the vets here are like, oh my gosh, you're going to kill your family if you feed raw food. Your animal will die. It's because that's what FDA and the CDC and the government have said for so long. How do we get your vets to be more impartial and give proper sound advice? Well, you can tell them all the things I just told you. I'm trying to think which one of my books has the best information on that. I mean, the Raising Naturally Healthy Pets and the Keeping Your Pets Naturally Healthy both have dog and cat information in them. Those are available on Amazon, so anybody can get them anywhere. You might want to gift your veterinarian a book and say, here's this chapter on food, read this. And other holistic veterinarians, I mean, we have a ton of stuff on our websites about, like, I've been screaming about food for 20 years, so it's a big hill to climb. Even some of our holistic veterinarians are still pushing prescription kibble. It's like, I'm not sure you're really holistic. So it is a battle. The Raising Naturally Healthy that one, Raising Naturally Healthy Pets. There's actually a chapter in there on how to have a conversation with your traditional veterinarian to try to, and the thing is, you don't want to back them into a corner. You don't want to make them be defensive. Well, I learned, you don't want to be that way. You just kind of want to say, I have a different philosophy on that. And I really think that my animal is healthier with a higher moisture diet because cats have no requirement for carbohydrates, and I know that. And they are carnivores, so I kind of want to feed them a high meat diet. And if you just approach it from, like, I've done some research, and, I have researched it with veterinarians, not, just somebody on social media. Because that's their thing. Like, there's so much bad advice on social. I mean, there's some good advice, but there's a lot of bad advice on social media as well. And so I see recipes all the time, even, cookbooks for animals on Amazon or wherever. It's like, wow. And I'll get them just to see what's in them. And it's like, wow, we're not even close to having all the things in there that we need. And yet this is a best-selling book. Like, a little scary. So, I get the veterinarians are kind of like, hey, we're going to kill everybody if we don't have enough taurine. Yeah, you are. If we don't have enough thiamine. Yeah, you are. So it is kind of critical that when we're doing this, we are feeding something that is appropriate. And that when we're coming back to their argument, it's like, yeah, but doing it in such a way that it doesn't challenge them. And remember that in vet school, they probably got about 2 hours of nutrition. Like, I remember my nutrition in vet school was for kidney disease, feed KD. For heart disease, feed HD. For liver disease, feed LD. That was my nutrition. Like, oh, great. Sponsored by Hills. Right. So, it can be difficult, and I get it. And I don't have a license to practice in my state where I moved to because I'm retired. So I have to take my animals to a veterinarian. I'm on the other side of the table. Like, I feel your pain. Except I found a very traditional veterinarian, and I walked in and I said, I feed raw food and I don't vaccinate my animals. You good with that? And she went, sure. I went, you're awesome. Then I told her who I was. She'd never heard of me, and I handed her a stack of books and said, here, read these. And she's actually become a really good friend, and she's awesome. So it's kind of just sometimes saying, look, I'm not going to budge. Like, I know that what I'm doing is right, and I'm not going to budge. And, for me, I'm a little luckier because I happen to have some initials behind my name that she can respect. But if you go in kind of armed with, like, here's some evidence. I know it's not a cat book, but Dr. Connor Brady's book, Feeding Dogs.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yes. It is amazing. He's a PhD from Ireland.
Yes.
But his is all science-based studies where he basically debunks all the crap that the pet food industry and the veterinarians are saying about raw food versus kibble. And it's backed by solid scientific evidence. So that one can be really good too. And believe me, unless you have an all-cat vet, your veterinarian is treating a lot more dogs than cats because a lot more dogs than cats go to the veterinarian. That's an expensive book, so you may or may not want to gift that to them. But, when they start seeing the evidence, like that little 2017 study where we showed that, hey, 94% of these diets are imbalanced.
Yeah.
What's your argument with that? This is a study. So anyway, okay. How about holistic grade grain-free? Are they acceptable? Nope. Absolutely not, because they are still 60% carbs. And when they're grain-free, well, first of all, cats can't make taurine out of grains. So when you read the ingredients, you're going to see taurine as an added ingredient because they know that they can't get that. But your cat is still being fed a carbohydrate-laden diet, and I don't think there's any truth to the whole dilated cardiomyopathy related to grain-free diets, but I do think that peas and legumes and potatoes are absolutely not an appropriate feed source for any of our animals, but particularly cats. So no, I would not, holistic on a pet food label, no definition. There's anybody can put that on there. Like pedigree could be labeled holistic. So, holistic grade, there is no such thing. And even human grade, they have to be very careful every ingredient has to be human grade. And I don't know what your laws are over there, whether they're following the U.S. rules from APCO, but they're very, very specific here about what can go on that label. The weird thing is they're so concerned about what's on the label, like, oh, that font was too big, that picture was wrong. They regulate that a lot more than what's inside the bag.
Yes.
All right, so
Bad.
since rice is considered as a grain, based on your understanding, cats require 0% of carbs. What's your opinion when one of the famous kibble manufacturers said that cooked rice are safe for cats since it contains vitamin B1, B6, iron? Yeah, well, it has nutrients in it. Yes, it does. So does corn. Are those nutrients appropriate? Well, they need those nutrients. Should they be getting them from a grain source? No, because you get those nutrients from meat sources as well, which would be much more appropriate for our cats. So, I mean, over here, when you go to the big manufacturer websites, they know they have to fight people like me. So it'll tell you why corn is such a wonderful ingredient. It'll tell you why Animal Digest, which is the worst of the worst rendered products, they'll tell you why that is so appropriate, because it's full of all these vitamins. Yeah, it's also full of pentobarbital. They just leave that part out. So yeah, rice. Rice is like the highest level of arsenic in any grain. Do you want to eat arsenic every single day? See, this isn't a problem for people because we eat different things every meal. And with that said, you should not pick one thing and feed that to your cat every single meal. Even with my own dogs and cats, right now I'm using mostly commercially made products from companies that I know, love, and trust. And I've been to their plants and I've seen their manufacturing, so I've seen the ingredients, I know what's going in there. And that's the best way to really know what's happening, but good luck. So my cats and dogs, they each have their own freezer because I have all frozen food. There's probably 10 or 12 different proteins in each freezer. So we have rabbit, duck, pheasant, pork, turkey, chicken, beef, emu, venison, like I have a rabbit. There's a lot of stuff. So I am rotating my protein sources and I'm rotating my companies. So I probably have 4 or 5 different companies in each freezer, plus all these different proteins. That's what we want, because let's just say, even though I pick the absolute best company with all human grade ingredients and organic veggies and all that kind of stuff, and it's formulated to be perfect, let's just say there's a micro mineral deficiency in there. Let's say their manganese is a little low or their zinc is a little low. Well, when I feed another company that is also formulated to be complete, maybe they're going to pick up that nutrient that might have been a little low over here. So I'm a huge fan of rotation of protein sources, of companies. So that means you have to find at least 2 or 3 companies that are at this level that you're looking for. Humanely sourced meats, organic veggies, because you can do premodel, but then you better have hair and all the organs and like everything in there. And that's the mistake with a lot of premodel. They don't include that. It's like, oh, meat, bone, and organ. Yeah, not complete. So if you can find 2 or 3 companies that are at that level, rotate them and rotate your proteins. And sometimes, like every time we just tried a new company the other day. So I brought in all this food and the cats were like, that's not my brand. I'm not doing that. Well, we started it's cats. So we started mixing it in with the ones that we know they like. And now they're like, oh, that stuff's awesome. So now it can be in their rotation. So it just, takes them a little bit. What should we look for when we buy a grinder to grind the organs? So if you're just grinding organs, your stand mixer in your kitchen will do that, or your food processor will do that. If you're grinding bone, that's where it gets trickier. So I actually have a 1 horsepower grinder. I love this thing because I can put a whole rabbit in there. I can put turkey legs and wings in there, and chicken bones are going to be fine. And with my grinder, because I got the big one, and I actually went to the store to get a smaller one, and they were out of that one, so I went up instead of down, and I'm so glad I did, because at one point we were grinding 150 to 200 pounds of food every 2 weeks. So on a Sunday afternoon, I could make 150 pounds of food in about an hour and a half to 2 hours, and then just fill the freezer with my grinds. So for me, that was great. So it's up to you. It just depends. Are you going to be grinding whole animals, or are you just grinding you know, it's if you need to grind bone, that's where you need to move up. My husband he's the chef, he had a really beautiful KitchenAid mixer with the metal grinding attachment, and I killed it with a beef grater. It got stuck and I didn't realize it, and I burned out the motor in like a minute. So that's not a good idea. It just depends what you're grinding. What to feed a cat with CKD? Again, it depends on the stage. If they're stage 1 or 2, you feed them whatever you want. My cats stay on their raw food diets unless we are, you know, really in late stage, because we don't really want to restrict protein. We want to look more at phosphorus levels. So you want to test those. If you need to add a phosphorus binder, you can. And then you can also just look at the phosphorus levels in what you're feeding. And so a lot of times if I'm making my own food, and we have high phosphorus levels, if you're using bone meal, that's going to be high in phosphorus as well as the calcium. So I would switch over to an eggshell powder, because that doesn't have much phosphorus at all. It's calcium. So you can get your calcium level up without driving that phosphorus up as well. Could you share your presentation slides to us? We need your food preparation formula for our reference, or you could share. I'm going to send this recording to you guys, so you do whatever you want with it. And actually, I think I sent you over a copy of
Yes, we have a copy of your slides. So if you don't mind, then we can share it out to the participants here.
Yep, that'd be great.
Okay.
The minimum protein content for cats, it doesn't have to be 52. I mean, if you look at AFCO, it's 26. I would formulate higher. I think most of my things that I'm formulating for cats are in the mid 40s, at least. That's what they want, and that's what they need. We're not going to wreck their kidneys with high protein diets. That's what they're supposed to eat. Busy cat owners, is cooked food good enough? Sure. I mean, gently cooked versus raw, or, you know, if you're using a canned product. The big thing with the canned products, it's really hard to find one that doesn't have that synthetic vitamin mineral mix in there. And it's really hard to find canned foods that don't have something to make it sticky. So avoid carrageenan. You'll see guar gum, agar. I love the companies that use plasma. So you'll see porcine plasma, which is pig blood, basically. If they're using that as a thickener, that's awesome, because that's so nutrient dense. But unfortunately, so carrageenan is the one that I really avoid, because that literally causes, first of all, it's carcinogenic. And the pet food companies will say, no, it's a seaweed source. Yeah, it's a cooked seaweed source, and we know that there's carrageenan 1 and carrageenan 2. One of them is fine, the other one is carcinogenic. When you cook it, it becomes the carcinogenic one. So perfect. So avoid carrageenan. All right, is there a different diet between long and short hair cats? No, just with your long hair cats, make sure you've got that fiber source so that they're not getting the hairball issues. So the best amount of raw food, you want to go by, you know, if you know the calorie content. So if you're using a formulator, it'll tell you how many calories per ounce. Like mine had the calories per ounce on them. But for an adult cat, it's going to be about 25 calories per pound of body weight per day. But that can vary. Like my outdoor active cats who are racing around all day, I'm sure their calorie content is higher than my indoor cats who are laying around like big lumps all day. So, you know, part of it is just monitoring your cat. Like start with, you know, recommended feeding, which for an adult indoor, less active cat is probably going to be 3 to 5 ounces twice a day. That would be a starting point. And then, oh, he's getting too chubby, we got to back off. Or, wow, he's really lean. You know, and lean is much better, by the way, for inflammation and joint problems and all that kind of stuff. So try to keep them lean. We all have fat cats. I've noticed some of my cats, along with others who transition to full raw, are experiencing constipation, passing stool every 3 to 4 days. So you may be feeding raw food that the bone content is too high. If the bone content is too high, they will definitely get constipated. So we may need to dilute that down. So I don't know if you're using a commercial or making your own. If you're making your own, you got to bring that bone content down. And especially when they first do that transition, they're not used to pushing that through. So you can also just look at, you know, natural laxatives. You're using wheatgrass, goat milk, try the coconut fiber, try pumpkin. Pumpkin works really well, actually, because it has soluble and insoluble fibers. So it's a matter of what. And then the other thing, maybe add a little bit more moisture whether that's in the goat milk, bone broth, water, whatever, to try to get things, you know, and a lot of times it's just a transitory period that they're going through, but definitely look at the bone content in the meal because that could be part of it. Cat diagnosed with diabetes, chronic pancreatitis. So I don't know what that cat's been eating, but if it's been on a high carb diet, that would definitely be part of the issue. And I have taken a lot of cats that are sort of pre-diabetic and have chronic pancreatitis, actually even full-blown diabetes, and we get them off those carb-laden diets and suddenly they're not diabetic anymore. Works much better with dogs and cats. I love it when cats will convert back to being not diabetic, and then the weight comes off and the inflammation goes down. Why is slow cooked better than fast cooked? It's really a matter of the temperature that we get up to. So the slow cooked food never gets to a really high temperature. Like some of the gently cooked commercial products over here, they are cooked at 165 degrees in a steam convection oven. So we're retaining all that moisture. We're not so when you bake something in the oven, and again, the degrees are all off for you guys, but 325 to 350 degrees in the oven is a lot different than 165 degrees in steam convection. So it's all really about keeping that temperature down, retaining the moisture. So that's why we do the slow cooked. But if we're feeding a high fat meal, for instance, if you want a keto diet with 70% fat, don't cook it. You can't. You're going to get problems. All right. I feel like you already explained this. Had to go to the bathroom. Your cat has gum inflammation. Prescribed hypoallergenic food from Royal Canin. Makes him drool black saliva. OMG. Switching his diet to complete raw food. I would, because first of all, we need something that is going to decrease the inflammation that he has there, but he probably needs a novel protein diet. So it's probably going to be something like rabbit, something that he hasn't been exposed to before. And rabbit is low in taurine, so a little bit harder to balance, but I would maybe look for a commercial product. And with those cats, and I don't know what you have available over there, but most of them I have cured, well, there's a lot of things you can do for them, but cold laser on the gums. I had one little cat, worst stomatitis I'd ever seen, gingivitis, and we brought her in. We did cold laser 3 times a week for a few weeks. We put her on a novel protein diet, used coconut oil on the gums because that's a great anti-inflammatory. And then if you can get a product called PEA, palmitoyl ethanolamide, wonderful, wonderful. My daughter's cat has genetic stomatitis and his mouth is painful and won't eat unless he has the PEA powder added to his food, and then he eats like a champ. So I mean, your vet's going the right way, looking for a hypoallergenic food. That's probably, if it's Royal Canin, it may very well be the hydrolyzed chicken feathers. But yeah, so a lot of different things you can do. Want to ask if taurine supplementation is needed in raw food. It kind of depends. I mean, I think that most of the manufacturers are adding taurine just to be safe, and there is no toxic dose of taurine, so you can add all the taurine you want to your diets. It's not going to hurt them. Cats have a high requirement for it, so adding it in, it's absolutely fine. But the companies are, the pet food companies are doing that to kind of cover their butts. So main protein content for cats, anything up to 52%. I mean, that's what they're looking for. Minimum is going to be 26%, but like I said, I formulate in the 40s for them. Can a cat in stage 3 eat pre-made raw added with only epichitin? They may be able to. The epichitin is to bind the phosphorus. When we look at the International Renal Society recommendations, they maybe recommend bringing that protein down a little bit in stage 3, but it really is about managing phosphorus levels is much more important, and having a lot of moisture in the diet. We also use a lot of herbal supplements like Romania for cats with kidney disease. Best first raw food for weaned kitten. I don't know what foods you have over there. I just went to the commercial raws that we have over here for my cats. Is there any connection between raw diet and coronavirus or FIP? Only that it's going to be the best diet for their immune system. to keep them healthy. So I would definitely do it. I would not be afraid of feeding them a good, clean, raw food. And that's where, when we talk about bacterial contamination, you want, confinement raised animals, much more highly contaminated versus grass-fed, free-range, humanely raised meat, very low in contamination levels. And you just need to look at the company that you're using. How clean is their sourcing? Are they, like the good companies over here on their website, it'll say our meat comes from this farm, and they show pictures of the farm. It's like they can trace their ingredients back, and you know where they're coming from. Ingredients from New Zealand are almost always really, really clean. So there are companies that source from there. So that would be my only concern if I had a cat with a really compromised immune system. I just want to make sure I have clean food. And some of these companies are using HPP, which is a
high pressure
sterilizing process. It's not the worst thing in the world if you're concerned about bacterial contamination. I mean, some of them are doing it over here just because the FDA is chasing them in circles. So it just kind of depends. Constipated cat, stool is perfect and not chalky white. Pretty sure the bone content's safe. Good. Provide bone broth and goat milk to what went wrong. He's probably just learning how to process it. You may have a cat. So I don't want to get into the whole Chinese medicine thing, but I did an interview yesterday on my Facebook page with her name is Pam Roussel from Perfectly Holistic, and we talked about the different Chinese element personalities and constipation. So you might want to go look at yesterday's interview. You might get something from there. Do I recommend NHV products? I don't know what NHV is. Is it okay to substitute EPA DHA requirement with salmon oil without providing fish? Yeah. AFCO doesn't give the best standard. Is NRC standard okay? Well, it's better, but remember they used purified ingredients, so it just depends on the ingredients you're using. But I mean, you have to have a starting point, so they're going to give you the minimums. They only have maximums on a very few things. Most of them are bare minimums, so you want to meet those. Like for the omegas, the vitamin D, they do have a maximum, so I'm always trying to formulate closer to the maximum, particularly if the food is going to be processed or stored in any way.
Right. I think that's it. We have 27 questions. I think we've answered all of the questions. Great.
Okay.
One more? Is there one more? There's one more, is it? What kind of raw food diet for cat with feline? What's that?
Triaditis. That's any raw food diet is going to be fine. In the last 1.5 months, your cat's poo is very loose and has blood in it. So he's got, again, I would have to get into the whole Chinese medicine thing, but he's got a hot diarrhea going on, which means we've got inflammation in there still. So the triaditis is pancreatitis, bile duct disease, cholangiohepatitis. So those guys can be a little difficult. I would still stick with raw. I might do a slightly lower fat with that because we're not digesting the fats very well. I would probably add digestive enzymes, make sure I have a good probiotic in there. Okay.
Right.
There's another one. Not a question, just want to appreciate you for the session. Really helpful. Oh, you're welcome.
Right. So yeah, thank you so much, Doctor. It's really been a pleasure. I hope you enjoyed yourself as much as we did. And we think that we might be inviting you again sometime in the future if you are okay with that.
Should be fine. Contact Krista.
Yes. No, I've got her contact now. So I'll contact her. And then thank you so much, Doctor. And it's been a real pleasure, really. And everyone here, they're in the room, so they can't talk to you now, but I can hear them like clapping and being happy in there. So,
good.
So
all right. Well, thank you very much for the invitation and the chance to educate more people.
Yes. And then we'll make sure to share your slides and information with the participants.
Thank you.
Right.
Now my dogs are going crazy. They probably saw a cat.
Okay, so it's good night from us.
And, good night, everyone.
Have a good rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor.
Bye-bye.
Bye.